Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hi, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. Today, I want to share with you my story and how I got here. I probably won't go into every detail today because different aspects of my story will come out through the series of this podcast, but I want to give you a framework of what I've done to get unstuck so I could journey forward to be living my best life. I used to let my story define me. I used to think that all the things that happened to me, or actually happened to my family or in my past, defined who I was in the present moment. I used to think that this definition of myself was fixed. And in fact, I would introduce myself to people with a long description of who I thought I was based on these external facts. It led to a very limited sense of self. And in fact, I actually felt almost no sense of self because I don't really feel connected to each of that description of who I thought I was. But I didn't know who I was, so I stuck with that story for a long time. So this is actually what I would say to people. Hi, my name is Jory. My parents got divorced when I was 3. My dad committed suicide when I was 10. My mom's parents died in a car accident when my mom was 16. They were killed by a drunk driver, and my mom was the only survivor in the accident, instantly becoming caretaker to her 2 younger brothers, and her Russian immigrant grandparents had to move in with them. I met my husband when I was 13. We started dating when I was 14, and we've been together ever since. And I used to be really overweight when I was in high school. That was it. I literally thought that if you really knew me, you would know those things about me. I thought you had to know about my mom's parents' car accident. I thought you had to know I came from divorced parents. I thought you had to know that my dad committed suicide. I thought you had to know that I married my high school sweetheart. Well, and since divorced, but in the beginning, that wasn't the original part of my story. And I thought that you would have to know I used to be overweight and that I had lost over 70 pounds from my highest to my lowest weight in order to know who I really was. And that's because that's how I thought that's who I was. I thought that those facts, my mom's parents' car accident, my parents' divorce, my dad's suicide, me marrying my high school sweetheart, and me used to being overweight, but since having lost the weight, was the definition of whoever you saw in front of you as I introduced myself to you. And yet, very little of that was actually about me and who I was. But I held on to that story because I didn't know who I was. So ultimately, this led to me having what I call my 1/3 life crisis. I was too young for it to be midlife. I was in my early 30s, so I had to find myself, and it really did feel like a life crisis. And in the process of becoming who I am, I had to figure out who I wasn't. I had to figure out what didn't apply and what didn't fit to that definition of myself. For the first time, I became aware that I had to separate myself from my story as a starting point. And I began to realize while all of those things impacted me, not all of them were directly related to me. My mom's parents' car accident, that was their story, and my mom's and her siblings. I lived the result of that as a function of how she parented, where some of my anxieties and fears were rooted in, but that actually wasn't my story. My parents' divorce, that wasn't my story either. In fact, I was only about 3 or 4 when they divorced. I hardly remember them even being married. Growing up with a single mom was my idea of my whole family, my mom and my brother and my sister. So their divorce didn't really impact me when I came to think about it, because I never felt like I came from a broken family. My dad's suicide, that was his story. Of course, it impacted my life and had different ramifications of what it meant for our family, financially, what it was like for me to grow up without a dad, my shame around that. So there were pieces of it that definitely impacted me, how it impacted my relationships, but it wasn't my story. A bigger piece of my story did in fact have to do with meeting my husband at 13 years old, starting to date at 14. Another big piece of my story was my weight. It was a direct reflection of my lack of self-confidence and not being sure of myself, which even after I lost all that weight, still didn't get rid of the self-confidence or body image issues. That part still stuck. But many of those things were things that happened to other people, not necessarily me. And yet, why did I continue to hold them as a definition of myself? Well, again, I think I held on to it because I didn't know who I was without those pieces of my story. So after college, I went to graduate school, starting on the path to become a marriage and family therapist. I graduated with my master's degree in counseling psychology and started the long road, 3,000 hours, to become licensed. I got about halfway through my hours and I decided I was miserable. I decided at 24 years old, I had no business being anybody's therapist. I'd actually never quit anything in my life, so that was a really hard decision to make. But it was not the right thing to do at that time. So I stopped my hours, and a few months later decided to get pregnant and had my first daughter when I was just 25 years old. I then just kept moving, thinking I had to do what was next. After I had my first daughter, I had my second. We had already bought our house, and by the time I was 30, I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I thought this was it. I was just here to live on my life. And I felt like it was going to be really stagnant from then on out. I remember one day thinking, all the people who I know right now are probably going to be the only people I ever really know. I didn't have any conception of how my circle of connections or people would ever expand. And I remember thinking that was a really overwhelming and kind of scary thought because I wanted expansion in my life. And yet I was only looking at it that particular snapshot in time. But I didn't know where those concentric circles would even grow from. So in feeling this angst of not knowing who I was and not knowing what I wanted my future to look like, and for the first time really sitting with the question of, am I even happy? I decided to start going to therapy. On that first day in my therapist's office, I had the sense that I was in the right place. And not just because I was wanting to get into therapy, but because the space of being in that therapist's office felt right. And in that moment, I decided I was going to go back for my hours to become licensed. Now, since I live in California, you need to complete your 3,000 hours within 6 years. And it was over the 6 years, so I had lost all that I started, and I had to start from scratch again. But I was ready this time, so it was okay. I decided to contact my old supervisor, who I had worked with 8 years earlier, to see if she could be able to have any connections for me of getting another internship. At this point, it was January, and though I had always worked in schools, I figured I would probably have to wait till the following school year to start to begin my hours again. Having young school-age kids made going into schools an obvious choice for my internship. So anyhow, I contacted Jackie, and she said, come on in. Let's find a time to sit and talk. So we scheduled an afternoon on a Saturday for me to go visit her. I'll never forget, the day before that Saturday we were to meet, I went out to go get my mail, and on my mailbox, I noticed there was a green ladybug. Well, I'm not really sure it was a ladybug, but it looked just like a ladybug, and it was green. And I remember thinking, I have never seen a green ladybug before. And I just noticed it. Got the mail, went back in the house, went about my day. The next morning, before I was to meet Jackie, I decided to go out for a rollerblade ride on the trail. And as I'm skating down the trail, I look down on my leg, and there stuck to my leg is a green ladybug. Now, I had never seen one till the day before, and now here I was, skating down the trail, and a green ladybug was stuck to my leg. And I thought, well, that's just odd. What are the chances? I've never seen one, and now here's a second one. And I actually think it stayed stuck to me the majority of my ride. I got home, I showered, got dressed, went out to meet Jackie, got in my car, and as I'm backing out of my garage, I'm noticing, as I looked out my window, on the side mirror was a green ladybug. I thought, okay, now this is really strange. I had never seen one before the day before, and now 3 green ladybugs presented themselves to me as I was on my way to go talk to my old supervisor about going back to get my hours to become a therapist. Now, Jackie's one of the most spiritual people I know, and she was always a great guide in connecting with spirit. So after embracing her and not having seen her for over 8 years, I told her about my experience with these 3 green ladybugs presenting themselves to me. And I asked her what she thought that they meant. Without having to think too hard about it, she told me that green is the sign and the color of growth, ladybugs represent luck, and 3 is a number of the Trinity, which, as I'm not very religious, I took to mean mind, body, and spirit. So to Jackie, these 3 green ladybugs was a sign from the universe that I was on the right path. And I loved that. It was one of the first times I could remember being aware and asking for guidance and actually receiving it. And though I'm jumping ahead a bit in my story, would you believe that there have been times, significant moments, when green ladybugs have presented themselves to me again? I just smile every time I see it and say thank you to the universe for reminding me that I'm on the right path. So what did that path look like? Well, I started my hours, and one day in Jackie's office, I saw a book titled Mindfulness, and I didn't even know what mindfulness was. And in fact, I missed an important part of the story. I told you that this was in January, and I thought I would have to wait until September to start working in a school again. As luck would have it, Jackie had a school that came on mid-year, and she had an intern all lined up to start. And a week before I called her, remember, I hadn't spoken to her in over 8 years. A week before I called her, her intern dropped out and said she couldn't do the position. And then here I came, and Jackie asked if I wanted to take the job. And of course I did. It was such perfect alignment, I even started the very following week, where I got to be the school counselor at an independent private school. So I'll get back to that in a moment. So I see a book in Jackie's office titled Mindfulness. I didn't know what mindfulness even was. I had never meditated a day in my life. So I asked her what it was. She gave me a vague answer and said that she had an intern teaching mindfulness in her schools. So I called the intern, who again gave me a really vague answer and pointed me to the website of Mindful Schools, which was an organization teaching mindfulness in the school system to kids. I looked on their website, and as luck would have it, there was an introduction to mindfulness class starting the following week. My timing was impeccable. So I signed up for the class, and for the following 6 weeks drove over an hour on Wednesday night to go attend an introduction to mindfulness class. Now, even that class was pretty vague and esoteric, and I still wasn't certain what it meant to develop a mindfulness practice, but I did know that it was enough for me to learn I wanted to know more. And in that first night, my path professionally and personally had been changed. So I kept developing more awareness of how to bring mindfulness into my life. One of the first things that I learned was how to meditate. And I still don't even know what meditation was. But it got me to start slowing down. And it was then that I started to actually pay attention to the messages. It was then that I actually started to pay attention to the messages in my body. It was the first time I was able to get out of my head and notice the stories that used to define me and begin to question with curiosity and compassion if they still defined me. It was the first time I slowed down. But most importantly, what I started to learn at this point in my life, and I think it's because I was ready to learn it, was that I wasn't afraid to listen to the answers my body was telling me. I used to be so afraid of listening that I think I kept myself really busy, so I wouldn't even pay attention to the messages my body was telling me out of fear of what I would hear. I was really afraid to be taken out of my comfort zone. I used to have such a fear of the unknown. To me, it was a big black hole. And I used to feel that if I could just stay in the known, then I'd be happy. If it was safe and secure, then I'd be happy. But I wasn't all that happy. So I started to have to make a shift in my mindset. And one day, I'm not really sure how, though I do have some examples of how this was able to happen, which I'll share about at another time. But one day, I actually was able to see the unknown as possibility. And from that day forward, I no longer was stuck in the old mindset that the unknown was a place of fear. Because here's how I saw it. I had the known and I had the unknown. And in the known, I wasn't fulfilled. I was stuck. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't feeling in alignment. And I wasn't even sure what that meant, but I just knew something was off. And I had tried. I had tried to fix it. I had tried to understand myself, but I still felt stuck. And then I had the unknown. And the unknown contained two possibilities. In the unknown, I could feel equally as stuck as I was. I could be unhappy. I could be unfulfilled. Or the unknown also held possibility. And in that possibility, I had the option to create my future. I had the option of finding myself out of my stories, of getting unstuck, of getting the happiness and the fulfillment that my soul was seeking. So this was a huge awareness for me that I am really happy I was able to trust. And I realized that my true happiness and peace therefore must lie in the unknown. And the best part about that was I was able to create it. That's not to say that I could create and control everything around me, but I could control my response to what was around me. And being able to control my response to whatever was arising was the key for unlocking my personal peace and freedom. When I was feeling stuck, I would ask myself, am I here because I want to be or because I'm afraid not to be? And for the longest time, my answer was that I was afraid not to be there. And one day, my answer was clear. I was actually no longer afraid not to be where I was. And then I knew that the time was right for me to take action and to create the change. It didn't happen overnight. And more importantly, it wasn't easy, nor was it a straight path. But it was the first time I was able to trust in myself rather than fear the process of change. So let me ask you, what defines you? How much of that is out of fear or old stories that you're just simply believing out of habit? What are you afraid of? So let yourself simmer with these questions. Sit with the questions of, do your stories define you, or are they defining someone else, or maybe a piece of you but not all of you? And more importantly, do they define you in the here and the now? We're going to talk a lot more about redefining yourself and getting out of old story paradigms. But as a foundation, just consider your path and how you got here. What has been driving you? And once we can understand how you've gotten here, then we'll be able to help you get you to where you want to be. Thanks for listening. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.